Hello, and welcome to part 1 of my deep dive into admin bar request EPM app control on Windows endpoints. In this video, part 1, I'm going to be talking about our pre-approval feature, and subsequent parts of the series I'll be covering block, machine learning and AI approval features. So, where is a good place to start regarding pre-approval? Well, I guess, how much approval can you handle? So what I'm getting at here is, what's interesting is that one of the key ways how admin bar request differs from competitor products is that with other products, from what I've experienced, the initial implementation leaves the user in a position where they're not able to elevate anything. So essentially, they have no rights to do anything at all from day one. It's up to the person doing the implementation to create rules for every single thing that is allowed to be elevated. And that means that if you have a lot of users and not a whole lot of time, the early phases of implementing that sort of EPM it could be quite difficult, because obviously every user is going to have different requirements, and that means lots of different rules, and that can quickly get out of hand. So admin bar request is different in that how you can configure our product initially, you don't need any rules at all. You just need to enable approval, as you can see here as the middle button. And then what that means is that users can request to elevate anything, and then it's up to you to decide if that thing is allowed to be elevated. So that means the initial implementation is much quicker, and you don't need to create a whole load of rules. Well, that's fine, but then I guess it still might make for a lot of approval requests. Now, with our solution, approving is very easy. You get notifications on Teams or the mobile app that we include. You review the request and you can hit a button, approve or deny, and then the user is able to safely elevate that thing that has been approved. But that said, it still requires someone to perform that approval action. And what if the user needs to do that elevation out of hours and there's no one around to do the approval? Therefore, customers should consider a number of different strategies to cut down on the number of approval requests and scenarios that require approval, and you'll find these in the app control area of our settings. So here it is, and you'll see that we have pre-approval, which is the main topic of this video, and then we're also going to do a video on blocking, which essentially by blocking applications you are essentially preventing them from going through to approval, so it will reduce the number of approvals that go through. Machine learning would mean that after a certain number of approvals, and you would set that threshold, an application becomes automatically approved. So that would be you would enable approval and you'd set the threshold to say 3. You would have 3 approval requests come in, and then the 4th one would be automatically allowed through. So that's machine learning. And then finally we have AI approval, which is a kind of popularity scoring system that allows you to specify a score for the application or the vendor, and anything that needs to hit a certain score or above that is allowed through, and under that score would then need to go through to approval. And then if it hits approval that number of times, maybe that's then machine learned in. So this is all linked up together. So as I mentioned, this video is we're going to talk about the pre-approval. So let's go ahead and dive in to investigate admin bar request EPM pre-approval. Okay then, so let's have a good look at pre-approval. First of all, where would you find pre-approval? Well, it's in app control, and that might be in if you've just started a free plan, so you might only have the global settings show up, so in which case you would just see app control under global settings. Just bear in mind that global settings in the context of app control means that whenever you put something in a pre-approval in global settings, it will go everywhere to every single endpoint. Even if you create a subsetting for a group of users to have a specific configuration, any pre-approval rule put up in the global settings will inherit downwards to all subsettings, and there's no way you can do from global settings to block that. So if you're in the early phases of planning and you know there's certain vendors or files that you do not want certain groups to be able to elevate without approval, do not put them in global settings, put them in a subsetting instead. On the other hand, if there are some vendors and applications that you want everyone to be able to pre-approve, you can put them in global settings. For me, I have actually created a subsetting which is specifically for app control. If you've seen the deep dive in subsettings, you'll know why I've done this, but I've split out the kind of approval settings and other settings from my app control settings, and that is basically because of this inheritance thing. I can put all my rules in a subsetting, and I don't have to worry about that global inheritance. So I can basically put groups of users in to my subsetting here to include those rules. But anyway, let us first of all have a look at the main settings subsetting I've got here, which is where I controlling my approval. So you can see here I've got approval turned on, and this is pretty much the kind of default option with our product. So that means that if I want to say, for example, elevate Rufus, any application really, I would get this form, and as mentioned before, this is great because day one with app by request, users can request anything they want. It's up to the approvers to decide whether or not that is allowed, so you don't need to create thousands and thousands of rules. But we want, in this case, the name of the game is to try to reduce the number of approvals, and if there are applications that we know are safe and we're happy for users to be able to elevate those without going through approval, we can create a pre-approval rule. So let's switch over to the other subsetting that I've got for my pre-approvals, which is this one here, and go to app control. So I think the first thing to mention with regards to pre-approval is that it is kind of like the highest priority rule that you can create. So you can see here we got blocking. Well, pre-approval takes priority over blocking. So let's say, for example, you have a block rule for a vendor to, say like Oracle, to prevent users from running anything or requesting elevation for anything made by Oracle. Well, if you were to add a pre-approval rule for a specific file made by Oracle, maybe a checksum rule, then that specific file would be allowed to be elevated without approval, whereas anything else would not. So just remember that pre-approval rules take priority over blocking, and if you're creating vendor pre-approval rules, and that will allow the users to elevate any file made by that vendor with no exceptions. Well, I guess there is one exception, and that is that with a Microsoft certificate, because there are system files on Windows systems that are obviously made by Microsoft, you would need to have separate rules for system files. But pretty much any other vendor, if you put a vendor certificate in for pre-approval, the users are going to be able to elevate any file made by that vendor. There are other ways, other strategies, for example, AI approval that would allow you to maybe achieve more granular control, but for pre-approval, think of it as a kind of permanent override from approval. So let's go and add a rule. So you can add a rule straight from the pre-approval section here, but if it's a rule that requires a checksum or a certificate, I'm going to need to upload the file. And what if I don't have the file to hand? And at the moment I'm on my Mac, so I don't actually have these Windows files. So I actually prefer to add pre-approval rules in via the audit log. So for example, I can just go to an instance of an elevation of Rufus, and then I can scroll down. I can see that I can pre-approve it straight from the audit log. So when I click on that, I just have to put it in the right subsetting, and you can see that the checksum has been pre-populated. So I don't even need to find the file, but as it is a checksum, it means that only this specific version of Rufus will be allowed to be elevated without approval. So let's go and save that. Okay, and back on the endpoint, if I now go and launch Rufus, I'm not going to get that form. I now get this yes, no prompt. So there's user interaction required, and I would have to click yes, and then I can launch Rufus and format my SD card. Interestingly, if I didn't want that yes, no prompt, I can configure the product to not display it by turning off what we call user confirmation. So I've done that, and let's go back to the endpoint and rerun Rufus now. So it's still going to run without approval, but you'll see here I didn't get the yes no prompt because I turned off that interactive prompt. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, if you have something that needs to run, for example, I've had situations in the past, slightly odd, but where a customer had a logon script and something in that logon script needed to run something as admin. Kind of strange, but that was just the case. And of course, the user confirmation prompt stopped the logon script, and that caused a problem. So turning off user confirmation allowed that script to run completely unattended. And so that is, if you have things that need to run unattended, then that user confirmation turn off thing is quite handy. Just bear in mind that you are essentially allowing something to run unattended with admin, so you need to make sure that thing that you allow is actually totally safe. So I'd recommend running it through your sandboxed AV provision just to be absolutely sure that works. So let's just delete that rule, and then we're going to try a different rule. So again, maybe we'll just do this from the audit log, and I'll try good old Notepad++. So this would allow me, so again, before I do this, I'm going to just try and run it from my endpoint. You see I get the form. If I go and pre-approve it, I'm now going to put it in the subsetting, but I'm going to choose a different type of rule. So I'm going to try a certificate rule now. So what this does is it's going to allow the file to be elevated as long as it's made by this vendor and the file name matches here. Now what's also interesting is I can use a wildcards here, so I could say like that, for example, and then I could just put in, for example, version 7, and then I can hit save. So what this means is that anything made by Notepad++ that matches this file pattern is going to be allowed to be elevated. Okay, so this is an interesting solution if you have multiple installers that made by the same vendor and you want to allow them both through, but you don't necessarily want to allow every file made by that vendor to be elevated. So if I go to 795, I get the user confirmation prompt. That's fantastic. And then if I go to 782, again it's matches the pattern, so that is good as well. Now I think I actually have if I go on this endpoint here, do I actually have Notepad++ on here? I can't remember if I installed it. Let's have a quick look. Is it in here? Here it is. So if I try to elevate the main executable, I'm going to get the prompt because it doesn't match that pattern. So that is quite a useful rule, and that is using the pre-approval with a certificate match. And you can also do file location matches as well, so that might also be a program files, Windows directory, or even a custom directory as well. Now whenever you're using a custom directory, it would have to be read-only. So if it wasn't read-only, the user could put any file they wanted in there. So just bear in mind that this option only works for read-only, and in essence program and Windows, they're also read-only to the user too, so just bear that in mind. Next off, we're going to go and do a full vendor certificate rule. So again, I'll probably just do that from the audit log. Let me go and do VLC. That's a good one. So let's just go into this audit log here, break that open, pre-approve, and put it in the subsetting. And now I'm going to do vendor certificate like so. And you see I don't have any other options. It just gives the name of the vendor, and again the certificate has been saved as it's been previously elevated. If it hadn't been previously elevated, I just have to find a file made by VideoLAN and then upload it, and that would then take that certificate off. So I'm going to get rid of this Notepad++ rule in here, just to simplify it. And then you see here, so anything made by that vendor would now be allowed through. So again, that would now work without a prompt, and then this also wouldn't give me the form to get approval. So you can see that all works nicely. But any file made by this vendor would then be, so any version of any software they made would be allowed to be elevated. And if I delete that rule and then go back, you'd see I would be confronted with that approval form. So you can see that's totally working and great. What else can we do? Right, well, we can, slightly different from the pre-approval with the file location. So for example, this one is basically a rule which is just allows you to put in a network path or a file path. Again, that is straight, and also the subdirectories of that would be allowed as well. So for example, on this system, I think I have a drive mapping for F and then apps here. So I've got a whole lot of apps that I've put. So if I had a bunch of applications that I wanted users to be able to run as elevated, but without approval, I could create lots of different rules, or I could just create a network share. Important that that network share to the user is read only, so I can't go and create stuff in there. So IT could go and put whatever files they wanted. Of course, they have to check to make sure they're safe, but put all those files of different makes of different vendors, and then users can then use that network share as their sort of installation launch share to go and run anything they want, install anything they want as admin. It's approved software, it's checked software, and I don't have to create loads of different rules. I just have to have the one repository that it works from. So I've got MySQL or Workbench here. I could try and run it. I'm going to get the approval system. In fact, approval is turned on, so anything is going to hit the approval system. If I launch it from my desktop, of course, if I launch it from my desktop, how did that file get on my desktop? I probably downloaded it. So we don't want users to be able to run stuff like that without approval. However, I have put valid versions of stuff on this network share. Now there's a few ways you can do this. At the moment, this is just F drive and apps. So I could go in here and just stick in that, for example. Hit save. And now if I go here, you can see I don't get the form, because anything that is in this folder can now be elevated without approval. And that is using the F drive apps. I could actually also use the kind of like the full network path. So let's just try that. Let's just go and edit this and stick that network path in there instead. So that would work as well. Okay, so you won't notice any difference because it's all just going to work, but you'll see that anything I elevate off this network share will now work. And of course also, I could take off that user confirmation rule just to show that it's all working, meaning that stuff that gets elevated off doesn't go. I mean, one other reason why you might want to take away user confirmation is that anything that pops up, you might scare users, but potentially they've done their security training, and when you initially implement admin by request, they get an odd pop-up saying, do you want to confirm? And they're going to may not be familiar with that if you've not shown them the quick start guide beforehand. If they don't know admin by request is coming, they may not want to click on that yes no. So by turning off user confirmation, they don't actually get it, so they won't actually know it'll just launch without any sort of opportunity for them to worry. So that is something you can do. Just bear in mind though, when user confirmation is on, we don't log. So that's just another thing to consider in that respect. Okay, so we're going to delete that rule. So that is the, and in addition, by the way, to network shares, you can use variables for local directories as well. So, you wouldn't have to type in the path to app data, which might be different, and also user profiles and stuff as well. So various different variables you can use if you want to allow users to elevate things in read-only folders on their systems as well as on network shares too. Cool. Okay, so let me just cancel that and delete this rule. Cool. So if we have a look, we've gone through the pre-approval and the different options for that. Read-only, let's have a look here. So the certificate rule, we did the pre-approval for the network, and then finally we're going to have a look at this one. So this is an interesting type of rule, and it's a type of rule that needs to be used carefully, because not all applications respond to it nicely. One of the implications of this is you might get a race condition with the application. So I would recommend, if you're going to have a look at using force elevate, to try it first in a subsetting with a small group of users, then certainly wouldn't go and create it in global settings, because the application that you want to force elevate might not play nicely. So we'll have a quick look at the force elevate application, and just to give you an idea of how this works, or the use case for this, I'm going to have a look to see if I've got an application called Putty. Now Putty is not something you'd want to elevate, but I'm just using it as an example here. So basically it's a terminal application, and I double click on it, it's going to just run as just a non-elevated, and then if I right click on it and go run as admin, which I probably never want to do Putty, but if I did, it's going to take me through that approval. Okay, so if I had a situation whereby I wanted to force something to run as admin, so I'm not relying on the user right clicking run as admin, and it's not a manifest file, so it's not going to force run anyway, I can use the force elevate rule. So what I'm going to do to show you this one is, I don't think that zips is a read-only folder for me, so I'll just check if that's the case. It is not, so I can't use a file rule. I'm just going to turn off protection, and actually maybe I won't do that. Maybe I'll use the hash. That might be more sensible. So if I just look, I think Putty is called something like SSH or something. No, it's not Putty, is it? I may not have elevated it. Okay, well, tell you what I'll do. I'm just going to go ahead and elevate it, take it through, force elevate test, audit log entry. Go for it like this. Go to the request area. I'm going to approve it like so, and now I can run. Yeah, it is called SSH. It's just I haven't elevated it before, which it's understandable because you generally don't elevate Putty, but there it is. So you can see in the audit log now, and I can pre-approve this, and I can select it in my subsetting. I can create the legacy force elevate rule, and I'm going to use the checksum rule like so. Okay, so I'm going to hit save like so. So you can see force elevation is turned on. Now, if I just two left clicks on this, it's going to force, can you see? It's going to force admin bar request to elevate that. And not only that, but if I open a command prompt and I was to go to, and I was to type in, so this is not an elevated, should we say, administrator here. So I'm just typing in the name of the executable. You can see, so we're catching that and force elevating it. Why would you want to use a force elevate rule? Well, there are some scenarios where an application is started as a non-elevation, and then maybe like an installer, and then midway through the installer another application is spawned off that, and for some reason the spawning doesn't correctly kind of spawn off as admin, so we have to elevate that executable. And if there's no way that we can sort of, if it doesn't elevate nicely, then obviously we would have to sort of force that. So that is a very common way you can force any executable to run as admin if admin bar request isn't able to latch onto it because of how that particular installer or sequence of launches is running. As I mentioned, it's important that you probably test force elevation with a smaller group of users before you use it, because there are some applications I know that if you do apply force elevation to them, you will see many sort of tasks in the task manager and CPU use and stuff. So just be careful when using force elevation that it's done with care and you test it first. Anyway, so I think that probably explains everything there is to know about pre-approval. Again, just bear in mind that pre-approval takes priority over all other types of app control, and also that if you're putting a pre-approval rule in global settings, it's going to go to every single device in your tenant. So if you want to limit the reach of a pre-approval rule, I'd recommend you put it in a subsetting instead of putting it in global settings. Anyway, I think that is all for now. The next video we'll do will be on blocking, and until then, goodbye. Okay then, so I think that's quite enough of pre-approval. The next video we'll do will be on blocking, so look out for part 2. Until then, have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Cheerio for now.